So tonight we have the opportunity to ask panelists questions about eating disorders. And let's see, we'll start on the very far left is Christina Alvarado. She's recovering from bulimia. Next to her is Barbara McBroom. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist. She's also the vice president for the Kristen Watt Foundation for Eating Disorder Awareness. And we have Jamie Olivio, who's a registered dietitian and director of nutrition from the Summit Eating Disorders and Outreach Program. Dr. Tony Paulson is a psychologist, CEO, and chief clinical officer at Summit Eating Disorders. So what I'll do is we have a list of questions to kind of guide us. However, if there's any other questions that come up in the interim, we will welcome questions from the audience, but I'll start off the questioning. So do eating disorders have a genetic component? Are these individuals predisposed to developing them? Anybody want to start off with that one?
Definitely. Oh, sorry about that. I got really excited. Yes, that's probably one of the major changes that has happened in the treatment community is that once we started looking at things, we discovered that there's a huge genetic component to eating disorders. And we've gotten even somewhat more sophisticated. We've been able to isolate some of the biological mechanisms that are going on in order to create eating disorders. And so a lot of the psychological symptoms that we thought were based on early childhood developments and different family issues, we've actually discovered really have nothing to do with those things, and they're more biologically based. So what this has done from a treatment point of view has really helped us understand that the first step of treatment is getting patients to abstain from the behaviors to give the brain enough time to heal. And then the psychological work starts after that initial phase of treatment.
When I see patients or clients and their family members, that's probably one of the first things I try and tell them is I look at them and say, it's not your fault. Because especially when I have adolescents coming in, the parents are generally worried that they've done something. I mean, what parent doesn't feel responsible for the well-being of their child? So it's not your fault. It's estimated about 50% of the cause would be the biological vulnerability towards some type of compulsive disorder. The other half is made up of all sorts of other things. So even if the family has issues about food, that may be only one piece of the puzzle. And you take one piece of the puzzle away, you can still see the whole picture. One piece does not make the whole picture. But certainly 50%, a piece that takes up 50% of the puzzle can make almost a whole picture. You need just a little bit more of it to tip it into active state.
And when you're biologically predisposed, you're not predisposed to an eating disorder, you're predisposed to a compulsive disorder. And that's important from a treatment point of view because you can't just focus on the eating disorder behavior, you have to focus on all the compulsive types of behaviors that might be. For example, abusing alcohol, abusing drugs, self-abuse, obsessive compulsive disorder. And so the eating disorder becomes a symptom of the overall compulsive disorder that you have the predisposition to.
Are these disorders commonly triggered by some life event? If so, what are the common triggers?
I think one common trigger for a lot is just a loss of weight. That seems to sort of flip the switch. I've had a lot of clients that have come in and it seemed to have occurred after they had lost weight because they just wanted to lose some weight in a healthy way and they were going about it right. But then it got out of control. I've had one client who had gotten her braces on, and if any of you had braces, when you first get them on, you don't want to chew anything because your teeth hurt. And they lost weight. And that was sort of, seemed like the trigger, though that doesn't mean that there weren't other things that were already set up, and that's just what sort of tipped the balance. But I've seen that a lot, that a drop of weight seems to be one of the...
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at the research, there's usually 2 times of life that people are most vulnerable to eating disorders. The transition from childhood to adolescence, and then from adolescence to adulthood. So this age group, college age, there's a huge spike in the incidence of eating disorders. And so we step back and we say, why? Well, a couple things are happening. Those transition periods are very stressful. There's a lot going on. But the other thing that we've discovered is that these are times when you tend to have a surge of hormones. And we think the initial onset of eating disorders may be associated with the surge of hormones that happen as you transition from childhood to adolescence. And the other thing that happens, but more psychologically based, is the difference from being a 6th grader to a 7th grader is dramatic. You know, 6th grade life is simple. You know, your teacher loves you, you're in one class, you know, you're growing up, you're the king of the hill, you might have a boyfriend. You know, this is your first experience with having a boyfriend, but you never ever have to speak to him. You have handlers in 6th grade where I like Johnny, and your handler goes over there, talks to Johnny, and next thing you know, you have your first boyfriend, and then the inevitable breakup happens 3 days later. Your handlers handle that. You're very protected. Your body is, you don't have to worry about it. You can eat all kinds of food, no problem. And then really overnight, what happens is you wake up and you have these body parts you didn't have the night before. Life becomes much more complicated. In 7th grade, you're going from class to class to class. And then these sex hormones get released. And all of a sudden, you feel very different. And your peers are talking about things that you're not used to talking about. And very quickly, your life has become very, very complicated. And one of the things that Barbara mentioned, that you know, you feel out of control, your body feels out of control, and it's very normal, unfortunately, for 7th graders to go on diets. And for the majority of people in 7th grade, they've been on a diet by the time they've gotten to 7th grade. 1 to 3% develop eating disorders, and so that speaks to the biological makeup that happens. But those are some of the triggering events. And then this age group, you know, you're graduating from high school, you're moving to college. This is supposed to be exciting, right? People keep on telling you it's the best time of your life. Well, they forget to tell you it's also very stressful, that you're having to pay bills and manage budgets, and you go to school, and some of you have to work, and you don't have the support of the parents necessarily in the next room to make sure that you keep things on track. And so even though it is very exciting and it's a great time of life, it's also extremely stressful. What do we do when we get stressed? We tend to focus on our food, we tend to restrict, we tend to diet, because we think if we can just lose a little bit more weight, I'm going to feel better about myself and hopefully better about my situation. And that too can be a triggering event for the eating disorder.